Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. I'm excited about the show today, and some of you have heard me talk about this. So the topic today is AIOps Unfiltered, what actually works. And the point is really to start a discussion around agentic ops and AI ops. And I'm joined by Marty Duffy, SVP Product R&D Operations at G2. Marty and I worked together there when I was at G2, so it's fun to bring him on and have a good conversation. And there's nobody that knows operations better than Marty, so I'm looking forward to this conversation. So welcome, Marty.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael. Feeling is mutual, man. Always loved our time together, and looking forward to just getting into dialogues. Our banter is always great.
Yeah, well, and this is such a timely topic, and it's one, I was doing a show yesterday with one of my friends that had commentary about a panel, and we got almost every conversation over the last couple months leads to a yeah, but what we really need
hmm
is because it is a piece that's been missing in the conversation, I think, and a lot of companies haven't started to think about it that way. So anyway, why don't we start with a quick introduction, and then I can jump into some questions. And I know we've got some interesting things to discuss today.
Yeah, sounds great. Um, Folks listening, hey, good to see everybody. My name is Marty, as Michael mentioned. So I'm with G2. So you can find me at g2.com. I've been with G2 in February. Here will be a decade, believe it or not. Been in tech for almost nearly 20. I tend to be a generalist by nature. So I've been in professional services. I've been in product management. I've been in operations. I just like solving problems, man. If there's an intersection of business and technology and a good gnarly problem with good fun people to be around, you will find me there, having fun with joy and laughter and solving stuff. So that's where you find me. If I'm not at work and getting stuff done, which is a lot of hours, I'm usually with my family. Got 3 teenagers who keep me busy, as you can imagine. And then if I'm not doing that, I'm a book lover. I love reading, and I'm a big board game nerd, so I love board games. But that's just a little bit about me.
That's nice. Well, and I, your point is perfect because honestly, that was a lot of what I relied on you for when I was at G2 was okay, Marty. Here's another problem. like, like
And
here, can you handle this? Like I got to do something else. Um, so, so always good. Um, anyway, well, let's jump into this. So just to set the stage a little, because it is kind of a new topic. So how do you think about AI ops or agentic ops now, and how should companies think about the function?
yeah, yeah, great question. You know, operations, when you dive into it, you can get into like vertical sections. If you think about operations, we've had these pop-ups of vertical specialties. You think about go-to-market ops, you think about revenue ops, you think about product ops, you think about IT ops. I think with AI ops, it's unique, right? So if you just say AI ops, people might think IT operations. You can think things like monitoring, incident management, service desk. I think a little different. I love the blog you put out on this, Michael, where you called it Agentic AI Ops. And I
Yeah.
think for me, that one should be agnostic of verticals. And really what it's about is this tool set of almost like this new workforce wherein how might we bring agents to bear to help run the operations that we do, where in the past maybe we've always relied on linear human workers. And I think that's what I'm thinking on and where my head is at right now, and what I would probably call either like almost AI ops or agentic AI operations.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea, and actually, that's one of the concepts in the book that we just published, and in the workbook that's coming. Those kinds of things is this idea of treat the agent like it's a digital worker, and then that means you define things differently. And if you think about it, and I get this question a lot, and I'm like, if you had a human worker, you set goals for them. What do you do? Well, you do reviews. You see how they did against the goal, and if they didn't hit it, or they had a problem, or they failed, or whatever, then you correct that, and you go back and you continue to work. And so somewhere in the organization, and it's not HR or employee success, as G2 calls it, because that's human workers. But and it's not IT, because it's not a technology issue, it's a hybrid workforce issue. So to me, that seems like a perfect opportunity to start talking about this more as an agentic AI ops sort of function.
Man, you're spot on. I was having some conversations recently with a member of one of the teams I look after on market research, and he helped us just build a new agent that maybe we can get into as we're going. But
Yeah.
he said, "Hey, what's next?" And I said, "Well, I said, Jeffrey, how do you start to think about this agent as a member of your team? When you have a
Mhm.
weekly stand up, how are you inviting them there? Right? Because if we think about these things and you set and forget, you're probably not getting the right outcome from it. So, how do you
Mhm.
think about them now as just a new member of what the work is that you're getting
Yeah.
done? And then treating them as such, training them, educating them,
Yeah.
keeping them honest with the reviews, making sure they're getting the work done.
Mhm.
You
Yep.
could think about them in that same capacity. So, I'm full hearted behind you, Michael. I think that's a great vision.
Yeah. No, I think it makes it much easier for people to understand. And honestly, if you are defining roles for people, it's kind of inherent in that if they make a mistake, they have some way to deal with that. And the same is true with the agent. And it is eventually gonna decay enough that it probably will fail. So that's why you have to have this continuous cycle of monitor. Governance has to be by design, and you have to be able to constantly evaluate against the goals you've set to see if you're actually making the results that you wanted to get out of it, right? So it's an interesting one, I think, and different. A lot of people don't think of it that way.
I agree. When you start out, you're just thinking about execution, job to be done.
Yeah,
Let me do it a new day without people. And then you're
yeah,
like, oh, I'm good. It's the finish line, right? But it's almost like when you get into a
yeah,
product release, that's usually just the starting point. You got to
yeah,
look at
it
the
is.
success from there, the adoption and all that. So yeah, full agreement.
Well, so let's talk about the specific case because I know you've been working on this a lot at G2 over the last several months and summer on to now, right? Can you walk us through the specific kind of incident or operational challenge that came up at G2 where you went, "Hey, we need some kind of a AI ops, agentic ops function that could make a measurable difference in how your team is getting the work done."
Yeah, yeah, would be happy to. Let's dive into it. Yeah, so it was probably AI's been out for a while. And we keep seeing these maturity points of the next step and what's going on. And
Mhm.
probably a couple months ago, for me at least, I'm starting to see this rise of agents and agents being accessible to business users. So the barrier to entry is coming down for them. So what I said was, man, this is going to be a disruption in operations. How might I challenge a small group of operators, business user operators, not engineers, not IT, but like day in, to say, help me define what the next wave of what we might call like an agentic ops person is. So we created what we call this agentic ops charter, and I picked a leader of this group, a manager, this great guy by the name of Sean Bishop, and he was kind of the shepherd of this group. And we picked up about 6 people from different disciplines. And what we set out was, hey, your goal is within the next quarter, 3 months, launch at least one agent for each discipline or team you're on. And they set out and did that. So
Nice.
that I thought was successful and great. If I dive into the specifics and just look at one of them. So one of the teams we have is market research, which Michael, you probably know very well. If you think about G2, right? G2, we have over 2,000 software categories, 200,000 plus products. One of the things people come to G2 for is, let me select the right software. We express that through scores. One of the scores is a grid, right? Vertical
Mhm.
axis is how are you in the size and market presence? Horizontal is satisfaction. You know all this. But for the listeners, we'll educate them. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
one of the important parts is the product that is on that grid. Who is the vendor that owns them? Many times, as we see in the industry, we go through these waves of mergers and acquisitions,
Mhm.
consolidation, separation, consolidation, separation. Whenever there's an M&A, if the vendors changes place, that can impact people's score on G2. That is a tough
Yeah.
thing to do because people will launch an M&A, but then not fully execute it until later. That becomes an operational nightmare for us because what we need to do on this scale is track all those M&As, track the awareness, but then actually change them on the day of the launch. And
Mhm.
agents just disrupted how we could think about this because now what we could do is
Yeah.
actually just see an M&A, tag it, put it in our Salesforce instance, and create an agent that would regularly, daily go query against cases, check the list of M&As, go out, do deep research on the web, see
Mhm.
if it took place, see the changes, come back, update the ticket, and kick it to somebody to be the human in the loop. took all this out. And that was one of the agents that we were successfully able to launch and
Mm.
disrupt work for the market research team that has historically has been a headache.
Yeah, well, it's a really difficult one, and it actually is also, if you think about it from a buyer perspective, because this you and I used to talk about this a lot, is that if you've got a small startup that gets acquired by Salesforce, well, when does that startup get the full weight of the market presence of a Salesforce versus the little startup that had a very tiny market presence and was definitely, in the lower part of that grid, and it's a time bound issue, or even like Salesforce and Informatica. I mean, Informatica, a big company, but not nearly the weight of Salesforce. That took months for that to close. How do you keep up with that and then, know that last Thursday that it closed and now I need to, so that seems like a perfect use case for a fairly, sounds like a semi-autonomous is the way to say, that agent that then pushes that back to the human in the loop.
That's exactly right, right? And like to your point,
Interesting.
man, like Salesforce is not shy on M&As. They do quite a few of these, as we know and see. And so,
Mhm.
yes, this is a great way for an agent to take on work that might have been recurring. Because you think about the human that would have had to do that. Now you're asking market researchers who are thinking about thought leadership, category creation, working with vendors. Hey, every week, why don't you go in and click these 45 cases and see if anything's changed? Like,
Yeah.
no value add, right? Like, so this is
Mm.
a perfect thing to actually get in a semi-autonomous, to your point, way to go in and do that rigor for us and just alert us when there's an
Mm.
action to be taken.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that seems like a very logical place, and a place where eventually you could get to, fully autonomous, or at least really close to that, um, over time, as you make sure the data's there, make sure everything functioned correctly. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Well, so I'm curious then about the function, because you've built out effectively, what we're talking about, agent ops or AI ops, or a squared ops. Maybe that's it. A squared I don't know. That doesn't work. Um, anyway, so I'm curious about that. So how do you have you put tools in place that help that team? And if so, can you give us some kind of an overview of what you wanted it to do and kind of what your experiences were?
Yeah. Great question. So, as you know from being at G2, we try to remain tech neutral. So I won't drop names, but I can
Mhm.
talk around them. We want to make sure we're always unbiased. So yes, there isn't actually one central team, believe it or not. So this a agentic ops cohort I stood up was almost like a tiger
Mm.
team or a SWAT team. They
Mm.
stood up, they
Right.
sit down, but the intent was to try to give them the tooling to embed this skill set within the disciplines versus build a center of excellence and a standalone team with it. So
Mm.
what we did in this too is we were asking ourselves, and it was kind of a big debate internally. Do you go vertical, think point solution, or do you go horizontal, think enterprise platform, right?
Mm.
And so where we landed was agnostic. We said, let the teams go where they want,
Yeah.
right? Because there was two school of camps internally. One was, hey, if we go platform, everybody has this connotation platform. Oh man, IT's involved, 18 months, not gonna get the benefit. If you go vertical, it's teams can run fast, they can do it. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's right. There's pros and cons to both, but we had this debate. And what we did was we just empower the teams. So we actually saw, if you looked at the tech stack for what they decided on, there was probably actually a mixture of about 4 to 5 different tools that were
Mm.
utilized by this team. Two predominant ones on like an orchestration or a flow level, and
Yeah.
then other ones that would be called in predominantly LLMs and things, but then some others. But the two kind of core ones were all around kind of like just a workflow orchestration, where
Mm.
we landed. And we ended up getting licenses for both to empower the teams on. They did a lot of self training and leaning in. We did a retro after, and one of the things they said is, believe it or not, they would have liked to have taken a learning from an engineering team and done code pairing, sit in a room together, even though they're discipline different, and actually kind of build flows together.
Mm.
But that's kind of the empowerment route we got, and how we kind
Yeah.
of thought about supplying them with the tools to get the job done.
Well, it strikes me as there's a couple things that are a little bit unique about the way that operations has evolved at G2, and I'm sure there are other companies that do this, of course, but so it's not only unique to G2, but the idea that you have operational centers across all the different parts of the organization, you know, most companies do have some kind of a sales ops, rev ops. So most have some kind of a, IT dev ops kind of a thing, right? But to think about having those other pieces of the department scattered about so that every function gets touched by operations, that's a little different scenario, right? So that opens up some interesting things that you could do that maybe if you were structured differently would have been harder to do perhaps. And what I was specifically thinking, I mean, I'd love you to comment on this, is the human factor of adoption is a big barrier in a lot of places. But having those distributed representatives help develop and then, roll out and manage, it seems to me like that's one of the ways you could try to overcome some of that pushback or resistance.
Yeah. Man, you were spot on, right? Because I think when you've got more of a COE that's a standalone, that's trying to bring something to bear to another team, there's always a fear of like, I don't know what went into it. They don't know my use case. They don't know the
Mhm.
context, right? When you embrace that within there, sometimes you lose that like benefit of like, hey, maybe that team had a center of excellence on that one tool and deep knowledge, right? But to
Mhm.
your point, now you empower this level of thinking and you're closer to, in my opinion, the operational context and the business context to let the team get the benefit of the tool versus
Mhm.
the tool expertise and then trying to bring that bear to the business context. So I
Yeah.
agree. And I think with that, you can get a much faster execution and adoption across many groups at one time and a much faster
Mhm.
impact to bottom line across many groups at one time.
Mm. And the other thing that jumps out to me that you did that I've been a big proponent of for a while is the idea that you've got to have an orchestration platform involved in this because it isn't a one and done kind of an operation. It's a continuous operation that that has to have continuous orchestration in the process, right?
That is spot on, and we're candidly still figuring that out a bit. We invested,
Mm.
so we've got two, but then like the question becomes when you have multiple, how might you stitch these together, right?
Yeah.
But having something there as the core that you can get joint learnings on from different people, a joint system that can kind of see it all. That is one of the longer bets. So
Mm.
we're thinking through right now as we look at these like vertical specific solutions. But then as we think about a horizontal one too, how can these things connect?
Yeah.
So that's
Makes
heavily
sense.
on our minds right now.
Yeah, that's logical, and I think the other thing you mentioned, which again I can see, I've had conversations with a lot of companies around this, is like the platform is not the decision for the agent, right? The platform is one thing, the orchestration layer, the governance, the ethics, all those things are embedded, but the other piece, the agent itself, horizontal or vertical, is a use case driven decision, and it sounds like that's where you guys ended up.
Very much so. And now what I'm getting curious on that I'm starting to see, believe it or not, and with all these things, right? It's just you got to get into it to learn, is wherein do those use cases start to see overlap? I mean, you see this like take agents out of the loop for a second and just go humans, right? Think about a standard customer support and a ticket comes in,
Mhm.
trying to identify who should work this ticket. Where does it get routed to? Does it need to go to multiple teams? Now, if you start building agents that take on discipline specific things, if you put that in the context of a ticket that might need to cross those, how do you start getting these things to communicate? How do you start getting them to talk? So if you have vertical solutions, you need some kind of an orchestration to get these things communicating. We haven't quite hit that yet, but as we're starting to stand these up, I'm starting to see this potential that's coming, which is back to
Mhm.
your point on why that bottom tier, that orchestration layer. My belief is that's going to become more and more important.
Yeah. Well, and I'll add another thing to it too that I've been looking at and thinking about for a bit, and actually in the book I covered in pretty good detail because one of the things that I think as you think about this, and especially if you're looking at your whole organization, is you've got to think about a collaboration model.
Mhm.
How do you communicate? And that today we've defined really well the human to human. I mean, people use Slack or Teams or Zoom or there's a bunch of choices and tools, but the tools less important than the process, right? It's important to have a way for people to talk in a continuous fashion. But what I think was missing is what's the right model for an agent, and how is that going to collaborate agent to agent and agent to human and human to agent, right? It's got to go all those directions. And as a part of orchestration, you have to define the model, and it's very different depending on the use case, because in some cases you've divided that out into 5 agents that are doing a thing because you broke the process up, and in others you've got a horizontal focus agent that does all of these things, and then the collaboration is different depending on how you've used it and who's involved, both from an agent and a human perspective.
Spot on. I was listening to another podcast recently as I was doing my own research and listening, and they were talking a little bit about this multi-agent networks. And as I was thinking about this concept and even just the way you articulated it, dude, man, we're a little bit older, right? Showing our age. It brought me back to like thinking of like the telephone operators sitting there that would like take the initial call, unplug the thing, plug them in for where you want to get routing, and right, like how do you, as you develop these agents, almost create a phone book or a taxonomy of all the agents you have created, and then set up one
Mhm.
operator agent underneath that's taking it in and then figuring out the routing and taking things back. You need that like
Mhm.
telecom operator sitting there, right?
Yeah.
And that's where for like what we're thinking about now, where I'm starting to lean into was, first pass was set up team specific ability to create these things. Now I'm starting to tap into engineering and my deep tech expertise guys to say, hey, okay,
Mhm.
start helping me think about this bottom layer and how we're going to do this like operator
Mhm.
orchestration type stuff. Because I agree with you. I think you're going to need that role in this to make these things really efficient.
Well, and in some cases it's hierarchical, and I think this is, it makes sense when I think of this. I've got a human that manages this group of agents, but what we have to think about is a human that manages an agent that manages a group of agents, or
Mm,
eventually some autonomous agents that manage a group of agents that do a thing once you've built the right level of trust, because
yes.
you've got to scale the organization, and to do that you've got to be able to scale the agents faster than the humans.
Yes, yes. And that trust, man, is that key.
Yeah.
And back to your earlier point of treating them like a member of the team, how often are you going in to reaffirm that trust? Trust but verify, right? Like
Mhm.
that is spot on. I learned that lesson hard, a couple of years ago when we first started looking into like RPA, first wave at some of this stuff,
Mhm.
and like how do you
Yeah.
stand these things up, but make sure you've got these quality checks in, and then build for the moment when these things can have downtime, can have hallucinations or missed calls and wrong choices, and then keep an eye on that for how you make sure whatever business service or business continuity they're doing, you are keeping in mind of and making sure that quality is high.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I know, we talked a little bit about it, as couching it more as a agentic AI ops, which I think is a very useful way to think about it. But when you start to think about this at scale, and we talked a little bit about orchestration, but I'm curious how you see this across the business. What is this? Is this single platform that we want to get to eventually? Is it connected platform? Is it perhaps a Slack or a Teams or something becomes more like an operating layer above those? I mean, what have you seen there?
I don't know yet, if I'm honest. We're in the
Me
midst
either.
of like yeah, we're in the midst of figuring that out. Like where I know to be true. I try when I get unknown known, I try to lean into what is a known that I can
Yeah.
get. And so like the one thing I'm starting to lean into is, like I mentioned earlier, but that idea of like this phone book. So like that first agentic ops cohort we're
Mm,
creating, we have a few of these agents. How do we start at least keeping a running list of these agents so that someone can come back to? Because now that's tool agnostic. I can take that to a Slack. I can take that to
right.
another platform, right? And have that as a starting point. So I'm trying to think of the curation and the listing of it to keep track so that we can come back to and then think about that
Mm.
synergy, that integration. We'll see if time shows that I'm right or if I'm wrong and that we should have invested in maybe that layer first. But I think at the speed that things are moving, right? Like I think we're all doing our best to stay ahead and get after it, and we'll learn some of those lessons as we go.
Yeah. I mean, that's not unusual to think about, because organizations today exist with organizational silos, and you've done a good job of having an operational layer that starts to tie some of those silos together. But you're not going to eliminate silos when you start to go across these deployments for now. So it is almost like an evolutionary process, right? I've solved this marketing process, I've solved this research process, I've solved this, sales whatever. And yet at some point you've got to go, okay, well now here's how I'm going to connect that at a higher level so that I can see across my whole business to understand what the agents are doing, when, where, how.
Yeah, that's spot on.
Mhm.
There's two concepts that come to mind for me. One that we've dealt with again without agents, which is shadow IT, right? You think about
Yeah.
how IT used to be, it was centralized. You got to go through purchase and procurement. One team could get it, right? But then we saw everybody buying in their own. I think the barrier to entry in AI is going to do that. The other part that's going to be very similar, because people can buy their own software in departments, as more
Mhm.
AI gets embedded in SaaS, right? So if you think of like an AI native tool versus like SaaS AI and a SaaS tool with AI in it, we're going to
Yeah.
see these standalone agents you create as well, but then these bespoke vertical ones embedded in SaaS that are going to have their own things running, right? So
Mhm.
even if you invested in the technology layer that's the horizontal platform, all these SaaS ones that are creating it now, you're still going to have this integration component to touch all those, in my opinion. So um, I think we're going
Makes
to see
sense.
both of those have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything's evolving and is evolving very quickly, but a lot of it is trial and error right now, and I've definitely seen that from other companies that have tried to deploy this at at scale. But one of the things that a lot of the companies I talk to are really having problems with is the data itself.
Mm,
Telemetry data. How do you think about data quality versus volume? How have you started to think about getting the right quality data? Because I mean, as we know, the agent has to have the right context and the relevant supporting data to be able to do anything, or you're going to get a bad outcome. So how are you guys thinking about that? And have you done anything to maybe start to automate that level of data quality?
yeah, great question. Wish I would have talked to you before we started. I think the the mantra for me here comes. It's like the old mantra we always hear in tech: garbage in, garbage out, right? Same
Mhm.
thing exists here, just at a higher scale. Because again, if you think what we're after with agents, it's being efficient, doing more with less, having something that can move quickly. So, man, if they are moving wrong, you just exacerbate your problem, right? So, like the
Yeah.
quality of the data is so critical and so key. Going back to like this idea of, do you take it in a COE somewhere or do you take it in the groups? I think one of the other benefits, the pros of going in like team specific, is those teams know their data,
Mhm.
right? So now
Yeah.
they're going to know and call BS on it early, so you're getting closer to it. We learned this lesson though. I think one of the tough parts of going within the team is the access to the data, when that might be
Mhm.
centralized from a different group. So I think one of the things we dug into that we found as we went was almost a parallel tech that was driving with MCP. And what we leaned on was MCP for access and giving that access to the agents, usually via
Mhm.
LLM to query them. Leaned on my engineering peers for that, but that's how we were starting to get after it. And there were some nuances there. What are you exposed in the MCP? What are you not? And that's where some of the hurdles came. It was that data access that were actually some of the biggest bottlenecks for us as we developed these early agents.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. I had a discussion yesterday about MCP again, and obviously we've all been talking a lot about MCP because it's certainly when Anthropic, launched that, it's a great concept, but they have since kind of backed off of it a little bit and gone, yeah, 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 but it's got some issues. And it
Mm,
sounds like you address them in specifically the way you've allowed the MCP to function. And I think that's actually what starts to happen over time, is more like a dynamic integration layer that includes MCP, but other integrations as well. Because as we know, there are a lot of off the shelf things that you can connect without AI being involved in it. But from an agent perspective, I want the agent to have access to the tool it needs in the right context at the right time. It doesn't need access to all the tools all the time, right?
correct,
Right.
correct. Just the
Mm.
work that you want it to do. Just like
Yeah.
again, getting back to that concept of an employee. You're not going to have a new
Mhm.
a new hire start and say, hey, here's the entire company's compensation. Here's the entire book of all we do. You're going to limit it to what is the access and what is the information that they need, ideally.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so one of the things that I loved about, when I was at G2 and about that sort of idea of having a double-ended marketplace is you can see both ends, right?
Mm,
So you can see the solutions and you can see the users of those solutions. So from that and from the reviews and things that you've started to see, I mean, what are companies getting wrong? What are organizations doing that, you know, that is a problem when we start to think about this AI ops platform or agentic ops platform? And then, when what should they be asking that they don't? Like, how can we help them avoid some of these pitfalls?
Yeah, yeah, great question. Um, so I think two things. Uh, don't chase the hype. So I think we're all feeling it, right? AI is the
Mhm.
buzzword, agents are the buzzword. We're seeing it in boardrooms, we're seeing it in execs, we're seeing the pressure to choose. Don't just chase the hype. Use case is critical.
Mm,
I would think about this akin to like any software selection, regardless of this tech here. Like anytime people talk to me about software, I say software's job is to get something done for you. This is the
mhm,
same. So unless you know your use case, you're not going to get great results. So know your use case, shop for that use case, and go in that way. The second thing I would consider is again getting back to that idea that we were debating was do you want to go vertical specific and trying to find something that's embedded,
mm,
or do you want to go horizontal for a platform? And what is important to you? And I think those are the two things I would be considering if I was wading in and walking into this. Know your use cases like you would with any software, and consider your investment. And I think there's pros and cons again. Vertical, I think there's speed.
mm,
Horizontal, I think there's longer term orchestration and durability. But that's probably the things I would be considering.
mm. I mean, I think the good news is that we're starting to see on the other end of it the evolution of the platforms from the enterprise vendors. They're starting to either incorporate that into their orchestration layer, or they're starting to buy pieces that'll go in. Some AI native pieces that are then pushed into that. Like ServiceNow last week bought a company that's going to help them with that orchestration because they rolled out a lot of agents, but the orchestration platform wasn't quite mature, which is normal, right? I mean, you at this point they've been at this, what, 6 months, 8 months, whatever. So there's a maturity curve that's going to come from the enterprise that could change that conversation in the future, but it also may just make it more obvious that there are specialties, and there are just like always, right? There are vertical solutions and there are horizontal solutions. So
Yeah.
that makes
Now I'm
sense.
going to have to take note of this M&A you just noted to put that in Salesforce so that our agent could pick it up to make sure we're
There
tracking
you
that
go.
at GQ right.
There you go. There you go. I I should probably give you a list once in a while.
uh,
Um,
I take it.
right. Interesting. Well, so this is an interesting function because it's a little different than you've done in operations before. It's not,
Mm,
technology and AI ops and agentic ops, whichever one we want to call it, is not just about the technology. It's it's cultural, it's
oh yeah.
organizational. So how are you guys getting ahead of the change management problems? And this is the age old software implementation question,
Mm.
and yet a lot of companies today, a lot of organizations today are stepping over that and not thinking through that up front. So I'm curious how you guys thought about that and what you did to help that the organization itself to go through this shift.
Yeah, yeah, man, that is so critical, Michael. I think you're spot on. Like the human component, remembering at the end of the day, it's this tech, but the tech is powered by humans,
Yeah.
right? And making sure the humans remove fear, let the barrier of entry come down to
Mhm.
adopt, right? So what we're thinking about it, it's almost from like you got to give focus, right? So like for me as a leader, pulling some of these people out of their day to day, giving them this charter of this agentic ops charter to give them room over a quarter to focus. So first you got to give them focus. Second, I think you invest in some L&D. So you got to take the fear out of it, and you got to lower the learning barrier. We've been doing this
Mhm.
probably for 18 to 24 months around AI. When these things first started bubble up, we started creating a course around what is it. We did a course on prompt engineering.
Mhm.
We went a course a level deeper on prompting. Now what we're doing is we're starting to bring that closer to the workforce with two things in our skill sets. Believe it or not, in our employee success team, we're starting to track AI in skill sets,
Mhm.
and that's not just
Yeah.
from like, hey, let's do an audit. It's from a standpoint of we should believe in this. It's a skill. If you want everybody to have
Yeah.
it, you don't just throw the
Yes.
tool at them. You give them a skill to train them with it, right? So we're going to have that in our career training and our skill sets for that from ES. And then we're continuing to do L&D and training. There's one going on right now, which is AI
Mhm.
for managers. And getting back to again to that concept, how do you bring it into your teams? How do you think about it with workforce
Yeah.
planning? How does this become a component of your day, right? We got to empower our teams with time and space to focus, and then the tools to embrace it to make sure it becomes something that's going to
Mhm.
stick around.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in, obviously I've been involved in boards for a while, and one of the things I wrote, probably a year and a half ago, I wrote a guide for the board members to use
Mm.
to understand this because you go like it's a cultural change, it's all these shifts, it's operational, it's important, it's competitive. Well, I want everybody from the board all the way down to the janitor to have some understanding of what's going to happen here and how we're going about this because a lot of those roles are connected into this from a success perspective.
Yeah, I agree, and I love that. Everybody under the roof should know, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
especially if you think about what we're betting on it for, much of what you see around this stuff and the
Mhm.
impact should be efficiency. It should be about scale. It's making everybody more productive. And if that is true, and we truly believe it, which I know I do, it's you want everybody to be more productive. So every single person should be thinking about this and involved with it and to get knowledge of it. So
Mhm.
I fully agree with that.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to the next piece of this, and I have a lot of conversations about this. But what kind of metrics are
Hmm.
you using internally to measure whether your investments have been paying off? And I guess my preface to that is that it's not just productivity because it's it's a there's a lot more that's impacted. So I'm curious how you guys have broken that out, and maybe even by department it's different. I guess so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question, man, on everybody's mind. As we're starting out, we probably still got more room to go. We're just getting very tactical down to like the process. So again, if you go back to the learning, this is a tool that should help you be efficient. Know your use case. Your use case should be able to be defined, almost like a product ticket for an acceptance criteria. What does
Mm,
done look like? What does good look like? So what we're looking for is a measurement of what good looks like for these agents to get done, and then the measurement for are they achieving that. And then once you follow that for
mm,
a little bit, what we're starting to do now is start to look at, okay, well, what's the percentage of time they're getting it right? What is that quality score for accuracy level on these?
right,
Right.
right.
Because then you can look into almost like you might do with like machine learning models. You can look into drift. You can look into when that accuracy is starting to wane
Yeah,
or fade. Right.
yeah,
So like we're just on the start because we're launching these things. So it's really around that quality metric getting the job done. But we're going to
mm.
start to look at this and how we monitor these over time for that upkeep on it.
Good. Yeah, I mean, and you said it the way that it works in my brain too is not to go, okay, we've got productivity gains. You will, and you need to know them eventually. But but the point in the short term is I set a goal for the agent. The agent performed. Did it perform to the goal that I set? Did it miss that mark by 10% or 30%? Or, does it overshoot or what? All these things, that's I'm trying to dial this into a point that has the trust built into this that lets me know I can allow those agents honestly not that different from hiring a new employee, right? I mean, a
Yeah.
human. I want to know if I can trust you to do the things that we're talking about to accomplish, and your progress against a goal is an as a critical measure, particularly in the first 60, 90 days or so as you're doing it.
Man, spot on. Right. Because so many people want to jump to like time saved, hour saved, this,
Yeah.
and those are great. But if you lose sight of those hours are saved because you're automating some task,
Mhm.
we're not here in operations and product just to do stuff and check boxes. We're here to deliver things so that we're providing a customer with the service, something there. And if those are saving the time for people but not producing that service, you've missed the boat entirely, right? So
Yeah.
just getting down to that level of measurement for like, is it doing what's expected? Is the service
Yeah.
provided without interruption? And is it doing that well? That's the spot to start, and then
Yeah.
efficiencies will gain over time.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I've said this for years, managing people and now agents, that you've got to be careful with the goal because your goal can give a good outcome, but it can also lead you to a terrible outcome. And
Yeah,
I see this a lot in RevOps today, right? We have more and more automation tools for sales to use. That sounds great, but if we have a fundamental misunderstanding about what's going to deliver results, you can set goals that are just not going to accomplish what you want. Like if 100 cold calls a day don't hit your target, 1,000 might for a while, but then 10,000 is not going to continue to scale, right? It doesn't. If it's not working, you've got to step back and figure out why it's not working. And I think that's something people miss at times when they think about setting the goal. Even the productivity gains. I used to hear this when we first started with generative AI, like, oh, I hate these things because my CEO told me I should be 10 times more productive, and they changed my measurement, my metrics, performance metrics, and I don't even know how to use the tool. They didn't teach me, right? like, like, what do I do?
Yeah, yeah, and they don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. And like, yeah, scale isn't always the result. You got to make sure you're looking at the impact, the quality. Maybe it's the conversion. Maybe it's whatever the result is you want out of there, right? Because what you might find is less is more. You can still use
Yeah.
agents, other things for automation to get there, but it might not always be scale as the answer.
Yeah. Well, and in that sales use case, for example, I'd rather have one high quality prospect than 1,000 low quality prospects, right?
Yeah,
Because I got
spot
a
on.
much better chance here than I do with that bulk of the mess that I've got to try to dig through. So I think that's doing more of the wrong thing doesn't make a right. I guess
Yeah.
is the way to say it.
Well, and imagine, man, if you walk that out 1 second, imagine you set that up and you went for scale.
Yeah.
Imagine if your TAM or known context to go through is 100,000. Imagine those agents chewed through that in a
Mhm.
week, but from a bad first impression on every single one, right? Now, where are you at?
Yeah.
Like you went through
Yeah.
all your at bats, you wasted them. Sure, you were efficient, you got them all done, but did you get any conversion? Did you get any results from it?
No.
Yeah, yeah, could not agree more.
Yeah, metrics are important. I,
Yeah, yeah,
I've always said, I just continue to say that.
yeah.
Well, all right. So let's get your crystal ball out for a minute because I want
Mm.
to talk about the future now. So, where do you think this is going? I mean, where does AI ops, agentic AI ops, whatever we call it? I suppose one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to define the name, but over the next couple of years, I hesitate to say 5 years, but 2 to 3 years is a pretty good window. What capabilities are you excited about? And what do we need to solve? What haven't we done yet that we need to do to make this work?
Yeah. Um, Man, even 2 to 3, I'm hard pressed on because pace right now is so
It's
crazy.
hard. I know. I
Oh
know.
my gosh, Michael, like one of the things we're doing is, so on G2, we're listing AI categories and we're
Yeah.
proactively trying to get products. Man, in the last 3 months, we've doubled the number of AI native products on G2 from
Yeah.
5,000 to 11,000 in 3 months. Like just the
It's
pace
crazy.
is so crazy. So it's hard.
It's crazy.
But if I was going to do it, and some of the stuff being talked about now, but I think when I talk about it for the future, in my job in operations, what I'm always thinking through is not just the hand wavy, great in the future type stuff. I'm talking about like, how am I getting the job done today? So like I'm looking at it as like, when is this stuff going to reach barrier to entry where I
Yeah.
can put it in the hands of like an operations team and say, run after it. So I think the things that excite me, multi-agent, we've mentioned this a few times today, but this idea of
Mhm.
orchestration and multi-agent and those communications from agent to agent,
Yeah.
uh, agent self-learning. Again, it's like if you set these things up and we talk about the importance is the quality, the importance is the human in the loop. How do we start getting those things to self-learn and report that stuff back? You think about it almost akin to like a great employee. Those ones who come to you in their one-on-ones and talk to you about, I did these things, I got it done. Here's what I'm excited to do next and change, right? And they're
Mhm.
self-learning. Like think about that for agents. If they just not only solve it, but come back to you with these things. And then
Yeah.
you take that a step further.
Yeah.
What if they're able to get some guardrails around that to do their own process improvements? Once you get agent to agent, if you've got something coming
Mhm.
in from customer support that goes to engineering to fix a bug, if that's able to come back and say, you know what we should do is change the enablement documentation for this product feature so we can tell the market about it. Dude, what if
Mhm.
that's going on, right? And like, so that
Yeah.
ability for them to become steps closer and closer to real team members who are taking that initiative in a way with boundaries, but in a way that's impactful to the business. I think that
Mhm.
incredibly excites me.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that is a very exciting thing when we get to the point where the hybrid workforce is really genuinely a hybrid workforce and productive together. And part of having an agent is that it should be self-improving, but that's the hard part.
Hmm.
And over time, you know, it's it that we should hopefully get better at that, at orchestration and all the other pieces. So yeah, that's great. Thanks. Well, that's all the time we have today. But I always like to toss this in at the end of the episode. Can you recommend somebody for the audience? A thought leader, an author, somebody you follow that you think would be valuable for the audience? And it doesn't necessarily have to be AI related. It could be anything, but just something that you think they should check out because it's been something to you.
Yeah, happy to. So you'll know this because we used to do it for G2. I was recently in Bangalore, which is one of our centers, and
Mhm.
I was traveling back, and I was traveling with three peers. I was about to get on 16 hours worth of flights, and I said, "Does anybody have any good podcasts? Give me something." So our new CFO, Alex Bradley, great guy, gave me one. It's called the Glue Guys podcast. Man,
Mm,
Michael, what I love about this podcast, when you think about a glue guy, it's almost how I've defined myself in my career. It's someone who
mm,
steps back, sees all this stuff, and then looks for that
yeah,
cracks in the edges and how you go in to hold that glue together. And these
mm,
guys take on these types of concepts, whether it's in sports,
interesting.
whether it's in tech, and they'll cover things like AI too. I've done a bunch of good learning here, but they cover more than that. It's all
Mm,
about being that internal glue and having that type of character. I very
mm.
much appreciate it. I've listened to quite a few of these recently, so I'd recommend that one.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, that is in fact what I think of as operations. That
Mhm.
is the glue guy. That's how I
Yeah,
always thought
yeah.
about it. So that's good. Well, Marty, thanks for joining today. Great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, thank you for having me, Michael. It's always a pleasure. I love riffing with you and leading into figuring out stuff and solving problems. We always did it well together, and
Good
even
stuff.
we're not solving them in the same spot, we're solving them at an industry level, and I love doing it. So thanks for having me.
Nice. Thanks. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arionresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arionresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arion Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.